Welcome to the CSC Aware interview. This month, we're bringing attention to the needs of women involved in selling or exchanging sex when engaging with the criminal justice system. Criminalization is a real concern for women involved, and the consequences can be far-reaching, including carrying criminal records for prostitution-related offenses. For those of you who are not familiar with the law, in England, Wales, and Scotland, women are still criminalized for selling sex on the streets. In 2018, 3 women in England took a case to the High Court to challenge the requirement to disclose convictions for street prostitution to potential employers. In England, these disclosures happen through the DBS scheme. The equivalent here is Disclosure Scotland. Women have found that disclosing these criminal records is not only discriminatory, but it can become a huge barrier when moving on from selling sex and from the trauma experienced whilst involved. In this interview, you will hear from Julie Swede, a survivor of prostitution, activist, and long-standing supporter of women with experience of street prostitution. Julie was one of the 3 women who bravely took on this case, and today she tells us what the process was like and what the outcome has meant for women.
My name's Julie Swede. I'm a survivor of prostitution, shall we say. And I've been speaking out against this for the past few years. I'm also running a project in Bristol called the Athena Project, which is a peer-led support group for women who are impacted by the world of prostitution. My story is I was kind of very isolated, I felt, in Bristol. I'd been addicted to heroin, came off heroin, and kind of went through the usual services, shall we say. And then it's kind of promoted to you that, exit prostitution, heal and thrive and carry on with your lives, when in reality, that wasn't the case for me and a whole generation of women that came before me that have kind of been criminalized through that lifestyle. And then it stays on your record for 100 years. When I left that kind of chaotic side of the world and tried to apply for jobs, I would be applying for jobs which was working with vulnerable women, mostly like care leavers, etc. I kept getting knocked back on job interviews, and my last job interview was with it was me and 3 women, and they were running an organization that works with girls that have left care and kind of mentoring them, that kind of stuff. And I got through all the interview, was told to come and do a shadow shift, and I was so excited. And then they said to me, "Oh, do you have a criminal record?" And because I felt like it was women, I kind of felt like we'd been getting on during the interview process. So I just thought, well, I'll just say it, because I knew it had been a barrier a lot of times until then. So I just said to them, well, I do have prostitution convictions straight away. Their body, everything, the air in the room changed. And I'm not lying when I say that. And I think it comes down to a moral judgment. Sometimes it's not even about the job you're applying for. When people hear that word prostitution, it hit something in them, and for most people it's the judgment of the women, so I knew I was up against that. They told me kind of we'd send it to HR, but I walked out of there knowing I wasn't going to get that job.
Julie told us that her criminal records were never an issue when she volunteered for different organizations, but when it came to paid employment, it was a different story. As she had anticipated, Julie didn't get the job, but the unfairness of the situation prompted her to take action.
I literally went home and typed into Google solicitors that help prostitutes. That's what I typed into Google, because I just didn't know where to go, what to I knew it was unfair. I knew I was pimped into prostitution at 15. I found Harriet Wistrich, the guardian angel of all women, I like to call her. And then I found out about a case which Fiona Broadfoot, who's from another survivor from Bradford, she'd kind of been fighting this for many years. I was lucky, I suppose, that I kind of searched and found it at the time I did. So I came on the tail end of it, kind of, You know, Fiona had been fighting this, and it was a long, hard, emotional slog for her, you know.
The campaign Julie joined aimed to challenge more than just the impact of these disclosures on women's job opportunities. As she explained, the requirement to disclose would come up in other parts of her life.
My son was at school and wanted me to come on school trips with him, and it would mean an enhanced DBS, and I knew the woman in the reception at the school, and, you know, do you want people? The reality is then, you know, they all start talking about it. So it doesn't just impact going for a job. There is other sides of your life that it impacts as well.
Julie highlighted how these disclosures kept bringing back the traumatic experiences from her past, and how, unlike sex buyers, it is the women who have to carry the shame and stigma.
When I was going for jobs, I would be told, when I would disclose I had a criminal record, they would then tell me to write a letter of disclosure. Now, a letter of disclosure is basically a history of your trauma and your abuse, really, because it's explaining, you have to explain what happened to you, how you got. And once you write that, that's in this organ, you don't know who's got it at this organization. And it's a really traumatic process to continue having to do that. Keeps you in that place. It doesn't let you move on because you're constantly kind of fighting against that stigma. And that my criminal convictions are from 1995 and 1996, you know? So how far along do you have to actually be? And it goes deeper than that for me. As a woman, how far along do I have to actually be that I no longer become what you deem or what the courts deem to see as a threat in some way? Because that's what it is. By saying we have to disclose it and it comes under enhanced. And then when, you know, it's such a traumatic feeling as a woman to feel, you know, that you're being judged. And to me, it's kind of like, well, what do you think I'm going to do to women or girls that I might want to? Do you think I'm going to pimp them? Punters doesn't stay on their record for 100 years. Punters, it doesn't come up on their DBS, you know, that they pick up women off the streets. And let's be honest, you know, when you're talking about women on the streets, these are the most vulnerable women. They're not empowered. They're not doing it because they want to be sex workers. You know, these are the most marginalized, vulnerable women. So for me, it's about changing that shift also from the women.
It is clear there was a lot at stake for Julie and the two other claimants. So I wanted to find out what it was like for Julie to go through this process.
It's been really healing for me. And that might sound strange because it's, you know, obviously when we went up to the Royal Courts of Justice and we'd hear us put in the same kind of cohort as rapists and abusers, that's not quite helpful, you know, that's kind of infuriating. But on the whole, I think knowing this, I didn't know, you know, I was just this girl who was in Bristol and had this stuff happen and kind of knew it was unfair and unjust, because I know women now that are in Bristol on the streets in my predicament, they don't get criminalised. They might still get stopped by the police, but they'll have interventions thrown at them. So I think it was really healing for just to be fighting it and kind of being around. I think I felt so isolated. I felt like it was just me, you know, until I found Harriet and Fiona and other women and other people I've met through this since, like women's support projects, you know, where you can feel very isolated when you come from that world. It's a very secretive world and very isolating. So for me, I think just coming through it, and like I said, meeting Centre for Women's Justice and Harriet and realising there's a whole other world behind the scenes that are kind of fighting for women. I always had a voice, but I was scared to use it. Now I'm not scared to use it. I think that's what it's done. It hasn't given me a voice, but it's helped me find my voice and not be afraid to use it. And kind of the more I do that, the more it lessens the shame and stigma. Weirdly, you would think it would pile it on because I'm out in myself, but my family know, my friends, you know, they know my past from, so anyone that matters kind of knows to me. So if we don't talk about it, like I said, it just continues. And like you says, it's set up in that patriarchal kind of system where we just focus on the women. The women are seen as this, the women are seen as dirty, the women are seen, but not the men who are driving around the streets, round and round and stopping and offering girls £10 because they know that they're withdrawing off drugs. Who's exploiting who then, you know? And I think that's what it's given me, is helped me find my voice and use it for women who don't feel as confident or have a lot more to lose than I do by speaking out publicly.
In the end, the case went to court, and there were some important wins. Like it managed to remove the requirement to disclose criminal records of street prostitution. However, as Julie explained, some aspects of this case did not succeed, like the fact that women's prostitution-related convictions are still kept in the government's database for 100 years. I asked Julie what her reaction was upon hearing this result.
I think it was that double-edged sword, especially for like Fiona, who'd been fighting it for 20 odd years. And, you know, she'd won this DBS thing, but then this 100-year thing is still over your head. So it was a win, but it was a win and a loss. But not a total loss, because that's why we're still fighting.
For the survivors who were part of this case, the fight is not over. They are now looking at other ways to challenge the long-term impact of criminal records.
Obviously, we're still fighting because that's how it goes. So the DBS case we've won, so women don't have to disclose historic prostitution convictions now. But what we're still fighting for now is to get the 100-year retention of them records off the PNC, the Police National Computer. So that's going to be a long slog. I think we have applied to CEDAW, got something going through CEDAW, and we're going to look at, there's different ways, the victims bill and different ways we can try and have some influence. But we are going to look at, for this new campaign, well, it's not new, but it's called the HOPE campaign, which is the 100-year retention. You know, if we're talking on a global scale, you know, the amount of women that are impacted, especially all around the world, and especially women who don't look like me, who are not white, who's not from the West, who are not, don't have a lot of privileges, So I think to get that on a bigger stage, it needs to be done. I think we're letting down women at the minute. It's a hard battle, because let's not pretend a lot of the perpetrators are in the jobs and doing the stuff that we're having to fight against, the lawyers and the judges and the governments. Let's not pretend they're all not all whiter than white. One of my convictions, I was caught kind of in a car with a man, a punter, and the police car pulled up. I was took into the back of the van and took to court the next day. That punter was laughing and joking with the police and drove off, waving, and drove off. I know they said they might send a letter to his house. I was criminalized for the next 100 years the next day. Do you know what I mean? Like, that man, even if he did get a letter to his house, it wouldn't stay on his criminal record for 100 years. He wouldn't have to go and disclose that. I think you should. If you're a punter, I think it should be disclosed that you're buying sex off women that are vulnerable on the street. I think that should be disclosed.
Unfortunately, the wins from this case had no effect here in Scotland, where criminal records for prostitution are still disclosed to potential employers. Although the limited statistics that we have tell us that convictions for prostitution are currently very low, women could still be carrying historical convictions, or they could be among the few that have been criminalized for selling sex on the streets in recent times. So I asked Julie to share her thoughts on what frontline services can do to support women who may have prostitution-related criminal records.
If you say you want to support women and you are supporting these women specifically, then do stuff to fight for them that is going to make it easier once they exit that world. It's going to make it easier for them to go on and move on and leave that behind them. These laws do have knock-on effects on society when we're talking about prostitution. And for me as a woman, I could never talk about, I've only spoke about that life for the last 5 years. I couldn't, it was too embarrassing and too shameful. The stigma was too much. Now, like I said, I've opened up a project. And last week, we only had 2 women, but it's a start. It was our first day, and I know word of mouth will be our saviour. But just that thing of having a group of women where we all come from the same past and we can sit there and we can talk about stuff that's happened to us, not in a glamorizing way or kind of, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I just know the power of healing in shared experience. And I think you need to do a lot of that as well as services, is bring people with lived experience to the forefront, give them paid jobs and kind of let them show other women that there's a route out and that it doesn't always have to be that.
We are very grateful to Julie for meeting us and telling us her story so openly. If you want to support the campaign to remove women's criminal records for street prostitution, check out the HOPE campaign on the Center for Women's Justice website. And to continue learning about the needs of women selling or exchanging sex in relation to the criminal justice system, please check out the rest of our resources on www.cseware.org.